Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic Goblin noise!
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. With free weekly content and free shipping over $100, you can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. I'm also sponsored by Face to Face Games, Canada's premier Magic the Gathering store. Using the promo code MTGMudsta will get you 5% off site-wide, with eligible orders getting free shipping Canada-wide. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the Generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game was filmed in my studio, with Thomas rejoining us playing as Aminatou the Fate Stitcher Esper Blink deck. Mika is playing Anje Falkenrath, which is a Madness/Draw Discard deck. I'm playing my Trostani deck, which is actually kind of a graveyard reanimator deck where I'm turning creatures that normally wouldn't make tokens into tokens and populating. Last but not least, Maximus is playing Rilsa Rael Kingpin, which is kind of a Dimir aggro deck. I win the die roll and start us off. I play a Plains and pass. Maximus plays a Command Tower. Thomas plays a Plains, passing. Mika draws, playing in a Terramorphic Expanse and cracking that for a Swamp. My turn is quite quick as I play a Sungrass Prairie and cast a Soul Ring. Maximus plays an Island. Thomas draws and plays a Swamp. Mika plays a Mountain. I play a Forest for turn, and am then able to cast Trostani before passing to Max. Maximus draws and plays an Island. Thomas plays an Azorius Chancery which comes in tapped, bouncing a Swamp, and moves to discard on his end step. During his end step though, Mika casts Thrill of Possibilities, and moves to his turn once it resolves. Mika draws and plays a Swamp. He then casts his commander, Anje Falkenrath, and passes. I've got a Plains for turn, which I use to help cast Greater Good, and pass. Max draws but has no lands unfortunately, and has to move to discard and pass. Thomas replays his Swamp, and then casts Farina Lich Queen. He passes, with Mika activating Anya on his end step to rummage. Mika draws and plays a Mountain. He casts Solemn Simulacrum, going to find a basic and passing. I play a land for turn, and cast a Cavalier of Dawn, targeting Anya. Mika responds by activating his commander to discard Anya's Ravager, which untaps her, and he activates her again, this time discarding Beacon of Unrest. His commander then gets taken out, and he gets a 3/3 Golem token. I then move to combat, and in a strange turn of fate, swing Trostani at Max, dealing 2. Max plays a Dismal Backwater, gaining a life, and passing. Thomas has an Island for turn, and casts Yennet Crypt Psy Sovereign, and then goes to combat. He swings Verena at me, drawing and discarding a Skullstorm. I then block with my Cavalier, and he passes after that. Mika draws and plays a Mountain. He recasts Anya, and then after that, passes. During his end step, I sacrifice the Cavalier of Dawn, drawing 4 and discarding 3. My turn has a Mirror Pool coming into play tapped, and I cast a Karmic Guide to bring back Cavalier of Dawn, this time destroying Yennet and giving Thomas a Golem. Max draws but misses another land, and has to discard and pass. Thomas plays a Plains for turn, and follows up with a Hostage Taker, which as it enters, targets the Cavalier of Dawn. But I sacrifice it in response to draw 4 and discard 3. Thomas then follows up with a Sigiled Starfish, and goes to combat. He swings Verena at Max to loot again, and then it connects. He passes turn, with Mika activating Anya on his end step, discarding Squee Goblin Nabob, and drawing a card. Mika gets Squee back on his upkeep, and draws for turn. He plays a Volrath Stronghold, and passes. I decide not to pay for the upkeep cost of my Karmic Guide, and draw for turn as it dies. I then play an Uvenwald Hydra, going to grab a Rogue's Passage. After that, I pass, with Maximus casting Behold the Multiverse on my end step to dig for some lands. Max draws and plays an Island. He then plays Rilsa Rael, getting the initiative and venturing into the Undercity. He grabs his swamp from the first room and passes. Thomas draws and plays Aminatou. He downticks her to flicker the hostage taker and targets the Ulvenwald Hydra, which I sacrifice in response to greater good. I draw some cards and discard 3. Going to combat, he swings Verena at Mika, and before blocks, Mika activates Anje to madness out an Archfiend of Spite. He then blocks Verena with it, and Thomas chooses to take 4 off of his trigger. After that, Thomas casts a Chromatic Lantern, passing, while Mika discards Squee to draw a card on his end step thanks to his commander. Mika gets Squee back once more and draws. He casts a Wand of Wonder and then activates it. Mika rolls a 20 on his d20, I hit Cultivate, Max hits Feed the Swarm, and Thomas hits Aether Mage's Touch. He casts the Cultivate and Aether Mage's Touch, which hits a Necrogoyf, and then uses Feed the Swarm on my greater good. Going to combat, Mika swings the Archfiend at Aminatou to take her out. After that, Necrogoyf bounces back to his hand, and Mika passes. I draw and play a High Market. I then cast Sun Titan and bring back a Farhaven Elf. And then cast Kadama's Reach to get a total of 2 basic lands, 1 to the field tapped and 1 to my hand. Maximus scries 2 from the Undercity, bottoming both, and then draws. Going to combat, he politely asks me if he can swing Rilsa at me, and I agree, but he insists that I don't block. I accept, and Max is nice enough to not ninja me, so I take 2. In his post-combat main phase, he casts the Ninja the Deep Hours, and gets to put a Smoke Shroud onto it, and passes. Thomas draws and plays an island. He casts a Gravedigger, grabbing Yennet back to his hand. After that, he passes, with Mika discarding Squee again to Anje to draw a card. Mika draws, plays a Swamp, and casts a Soul Ring before passing. I draw, and then eternalize my Timeless Witness. I get back Karmic Guide to my hand, and then cast it, which as it enters brings back the Ulvenwald Hydra. I get a Bountiful Promenade from the trigger, and then go to combat, swinging the Sun Titan at Thomas for 6. This lets me return Temple of Plenty, and I scry 1 to the bottom, and Thomas then takes the hit. Maximus goads my Hydra to the Undercity trigger, and draws her turn. He plays an island, and then goes to combat. This has Thomas responding by scrying 1 with a Starfish. Maximus then swings the Ninja at Thomas for 3 in the air, and he takes it, and Max draws a card. Maximus then plays a Cavern Harpy, bouncing Rilsa, and then recasts her to draw a card off the Undercity. Maximus then passes. Thomas plays a Devastation Tide, with Mika responding by activating the wand and hitting Rootbound defenses, Exhume, and Mortify. He rolls a 2, and only casts a Mortify, hitting my Sun Titan. All the non-land permanents then get bounced, and Thomas starts to rebuild by recasting the Sigiled Starfish and passing. Mika returns Squee on his upkeep and draws. He plays a Mountain and recasts the Soul Ring, followed by an Insolent Neonate, and then recasts his commander again. He follows up with Chandra Ablaze and then downticks her to all make us discard our hands and draw a new 3. With nothing else, he passes. I play a Command Tower and then cast 3 visits for Scattered Groves. I then drop a Helm of the Host before passing. Maximus completes the Undercity, grabbing a Staunch Throne Guard and becomes the Monarch. He then draws and plays a Siphon Mind, making us each discard a card and draws 3. Max then follows up with a Mortuary Mire, putting the Cavern Harpy on top of his library, and passes, drawing from being the Monarch. In Thomas's main phase, he plays an Agent of Treachery and steals Chandra Ablaze. He then downticks her, making us all wheel again, and he passes after that. Mika draws and activates Anje, discarding Malevolent Whispers but not casting it to draw a card. He then activates her again, discarding and drawing, and then casts a Sire of Insanity. Mika follows up with an Ob Nixilis the Adversary, and sacrifices the insolent neonate to make a copy of it, and then upticks both of them to make us all lose 4 life. After that, he passes, and during his end step, I cast Swords to Plowshares on Sire of Insanity. I draw and play See the Unwritten, getting to keep an Angel of Finality off of it and exiling Mika's graveyard. I then equip the Helm of the Host to it, and moving to combat, make a copy that exiles Thomas's graveyard. I then swing the Kami at Small Nixilis, and in my post-combat main phase, cast a Fauna Shaman and pass. Max gets a Swamp off the Undercity trigger and draws. He then recasts Rilsa, putting 2 +1/+1 counters onto her, and after that, he draws from being the Monarch as he passes. Thomas plays a Panharmonicon in his main phase, and then casts Spark Double, making another Agent of Treachery. This lets him steal the Helm of the Host and Staunch Throne Guard. And during his end step, he gets to draw 6 cards thanks to having 2 active agents. Mika draws, but with no plays, passes. I draw and play a Blade of Selves, putting it onto the Angel of Finality because I just need a ton of tokens of it. I then go to combat and swing the original at Thomas, making a copy that swings at Mika and 1 at Max. I exile Mika and Max's graveyards as well, and get the initiative and steal the Monarchy. I get to grab a basic Plains off the Undercity trigger, and then move to my end step, drawing from being the Monarch. Max draws while Thomas scries with the Starfish. He then plays a Vicious Battle Rager, regaining the initiative, and deals 5 to Thomas with the Undercity trigger. Max then follows up with an island, and at this point we realize that Thomas should have an Angel of Finality from the Helm, so he makes one and exiles my graveyard. Maximus then swings at me for 9, regaining the Monarchy, and then follows up with a Mulldrifter that he evokes in his second main phase. He draws the 2, and then casts Blur on it to draw 2 more and keep it in play in response to the evoke trigger. After that, Max draws from the Monarchy and passes. Thomas has a Forge of Heroes, and then moves the Helm to the Agent of Treachery before moving to combat. Before letting him go to combat though, Mika activates Anje again to madness a Dark Withering and destroys the Agent with the Helm, and draws a card. For combat, Thomas then swings the Throne Guard at Mika and the Angel at me. Mika responds by discarding Squee to draw off Anje, and we then take our hits. In his post-combat main phase, Thomas upticks Chandra, discarding a land. To finish things off, he casts a Return to Dust, exiling Mika's Soul Ring and my Blade of Selves, and passes. Mika returns the Squee on his upkeep and draws. He then discards Squee to draw with his commander, before casting a Blasphemous Act. Thomas scries in response, but the Blasphemous Act still resolves. Mika then follows up with a Jalem Tome, and activates it to loot as well, before casting a Plague Reaver and passing. I play a Plains, and cast an Aetherflux Reservoir. I follow up with Trostani and the Seedborn Muse to gain some life, and pass. Max draws from the Undercity and draws her turn. He plays an Esper Panorama and recasts Rilsa, completing the dungeon and getting a Blighted Agent from it with 2 +1/+1 counters and hexproof until his next turn. He passes after that. Thomas draws and miracles a Banishing Strike, targeting my Seedborn Muse. I respond by paying 50 life to the Aetherflux Reservoir to blast him, and Thomas responds again with a Crib Swap targeting the Muse. I then activate the Mirror Pool to make a token copy of it, and the original Muse then gets exiled, and Thomas dies. Mika draws and casts an Ox of Agonis, discarding his hand and drawing 3. Going to combat, he swings the Plague Reaver at me for 6, which I take. He then discards 2 to the Plague Reaver and gives it to me and passes. I draw and equip Trostani with the Helm of the Host, and Mika responds with an Eat to Extinction on her. I activate Trostani in response, populating my Seedborn Muse, and gaining some life, and then Trostani goes to the command zone. After that, I sacrifice the Plague Reaver to Hive Market, and cast a Secure Tribe Elder and pass. During the end step, Maximus cycles an Ash Barrens for a swamp. Max gets another basic off the Undercity and draws. He plays a swamp and then casts a Strider Harness, equipping it to the Blighted Agent. He then plays an Aqueous Form on Rilsa. Maximus also casts and equips a Hunter's Cloak onto Rilsa before going to combat. He swings the Blighted Agent at me and Rilsa at Mika, giving the Blighted Agent +5/+0 from Rilsa. I then die to poison damage, while Mika takes 2. Max then passes, drawing from being the Monarch, and Mika loots the tomb before moving to his turn. Mika draws and casts a Midgame, and then casts Ensnaring Bridge. He follows up by down-kicking Chandra away, making Max discard his hand, and takes 12 from Midgame before they each draw 3. Mika also plays a Rix Maddie, and activates it to make everyone discard a card, dealing 2 more to Max from Midgame. Max scries 2 from the Undercity and draws. He casts a Crashing Drawbridge and then a Mistblade Shinobi before moving the Haunted Cloak to the Shinobi. Going to combat, he swings it at Mika, getting under the Ensnaring Bridge, and gives it the +5/+0 buff from Rilsa as well, not to mention Death Touch and Menace. Mika then takes 6, and Max bounces the Ox with the Shinobi's trigger. Max then draws from being the Monarch and passes, while Mika loots the Jalem Tome on his end step. Mika draws and plays an Ash Barrens. He then casts Court of Ambition and Curse of Fool's Wisdom, targeting Max. After that, Mika draws from being the Monarch and passes. Max then cracks the Esper Panorama, grabbing a basic on his end step, and we move to Max's turn. Max goads his own Blighted Agent with the Undercity trigger and draws, losing 2, while Mika gains 2. He then plays a Viscera Seer and a Passwall Adept. Moving to combat, he runs back by attacking with a Shinobi for 6 again, and regains the Monarchy after connecting and passing. He draws at the end of turn, losing 2, while Mika gains 2. And Mika activates the Tome once more to Rummage. The Court triggers on Mika's upkeep, and Max decides to discard a card, losing 2, and then Mika draws for turn. He plays a Commander Sphere, and then a Blazing Spectre, passing. Maximus sacrifices his Blighted Agent, Crashing Drawbridge, Passwall Adept, and Viscera Seer, scrying 3 times and bottoming all of them. He then draws from the Undercity and for turn, and gets drained for 4. He casts a Ghostly Flicker on Rilsa, completing the Undercity, and this time getting an Underdark Explorer. This gets him back into the dungeon again, and he grabs a basic land to hand. He then casts the Capsizing Wave part of Sword Coast Serpent to bounce and recast Rilsa. He scries 2 and passes, but his draw from the Monarchy and Mika's Court of Ambition will be dealing the last points of damage to him, and Mika wins the game. Game review time. So you might have picked up on this, but going into this game, Maximus was a little bit under the wrong impression as to what people were playing. I think everyone at the table wanted to play a lower power deck, and he went really low with basically a budget Baldur's Gate tribal deck. As you saw, his deck was focused around the Undercity and going further and further into it, and it actually provided pretty decent value for him. I think he might have been able to sneak out a win had it not been for that Ensnaring Bridge, preventing his Blighted Agent from attacking. Thomas's Aminatou deck got really scary with those multiple Agents of Treachery, and I'm glad he didn't have a chance to use the Helm of the Host to make more. I probably shouldn't have killed him with the Aetherflux Reservoir, although I really wanted to keep my Seedborn Muse around. It was a lot of life to trade for only 9 points of life on his side, but I've often found that my deck can bounce back in terms of life so easily as long as I have Trostani out. Mika's Anje Falkenrath deck seemed to be pretty much a stock list with a few fun upgrades. That Sire of Insanity I am so glad I removed, because that can result in some really long, no one having fun kind of games. He did say that he only wanted to play this once on camera because it can cause some really long games unfortunately, but I didn't mind this too much. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.